He was one of our nation's greatest presidents, but his road to the presidency was anything but great.
And that history lesson may teach us something about this year's presidential election. News 8's Angie Sharp is here with what happened in 1860 that could repeat itself in 2016.
We may think we can predict who will be up against who and who will win this year, but anything can happen, and Abraham Lincoln is proof of that. You know him for saving the Union, for freeing the slaves. But what you might not know is that Abe Lincoln was a nobody from nowhere.
Out here in the Midwest, or as it was called, the West at the time, they were thought of as uneducated hicks, and Lincoln was the embodiment of those problems.
That's James Cornelius.
Lincoln had a thin, high, reedy voice.
He tells us that Lincoln really made a name for himself in 1858. That was the year of the great debates against Stephen Douglas, including one at Knox College in Galesburg.
That's the first Senate election in our history that was covered by newspapers all over the country.
But 2 years later, in 1860, there was another guy,
William Seward,
who everyone assumed would be the Republican presidential nominee, including Seward himself.
Seward was in the forefront of the anti-slavery movement, and the Republicans definitely stood for anti-slavery. But that was not going to be a winning position nationally.
The party needed a unifier, and so when it came time to pick a spot for the Republican National Convention, strategy started.
The Illinois party said, well, let's pick a neutral place. How about Chicago?
It gave Lincoln a big advantage. Cornelius says there are even stories of Lincoln supporters printing fake tickets so they could flood the convention hall, cheer Lincoln's name, and separate supporters of the other candidates.
It didn't change the number of delegates from all the states.
Seward was in the lead, but only liked in his home state of New York, not really anywhere else.
You elect him as your nominee, and you're going to lose in November to the Democrats again.
So after the first ballot, everything changed, including those pledged delegates.
You're pledged to it, but you're not legally bound.
Deals were dealt, and after 3 days on the third ballot, a miracle. Lincoln won.
So sometimes money works, sometimes numbers work, sometimes momentum beats both of those.
Lincoln had already unified the party. Now he had to unify the country, and his campaign poster shows one way he did it.
And it has terrific little elements, try to appeal to lots of people. There's a sailing ship and a factory and a prosperous farm. Lincoln was able to build up the party. That's what he was best at. He was a good organizer.
And most of all, Cornelius says he was civil.
He didn't get affected by insults to his person or to his party. He was civil.
We can learn a lot from Mr. Lincoln, couldn't we?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Lincoln's road to the White House was not an easy one, but it's one to keep in mind more than 150 years later. Something else to keep in mind, a few weeks later, the Democrats held their convention and they split. In all, 4 candidates ran for president in 1860, and no one won a popular majority. Lincoln had just 39% of the vote and won. And our expert says that's happened 18 times in our history. In about 1/3 of our elections, we've elected a president with less than 50% of the popular vote. For example, Woodrow Wilson, he had 42% of the popular vote. Bill Clinton had 43%. That means if even one minor party person gets into the race, we could see something like that happen this year as well.